World Empires Series Part 9, The Late Middle Ages and the Renaissance Chapters, 5562-1300-1500 AD Introduction, The High Medieval Period, The Age of Crusades and Cathedrals, of Thomas Aquinas and Islam's Golden Age, ends with the 14th century. And the 14th century begins with a catastrophe so total it would reshape European society from its foundations. We are entering the era of the Black Death, the 100 Years' War, the fall of Constantinople, and the Renaissance, an era of destruction and creation so intertwined that they cannot be separated. Chapter 55, The Black Death. In October 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the port of Messina in Sicily. The people who came to meet the ships found most of the sailors dead, and the survivors covered in mysterious black swellings on their armpits and groins, oozing blood and pus. The Sicilian authorities ordered the ships out of harbor immediately. It was too late. The bubonic plague had arrived in Europe. What followed in the next 3 years was the greatest demographic catastrophe in recorded European history. Modern estimates suggest that between 30 and 60% of Europe's population died, somewhere between 25 and 50 million people. In some areas, 2/3 of the population perished. The streets of great cities were choked with bodies. The social infrastructure, the priests, the doctors, the gravediggers were themselves dying. Agnolo di Tura of Siena, who buried 5 of his own children with his own hands, wrote, "In the year of the Lord 1348, there died so many people that all believed it was the end of the world." He was not alone in that belief. The Black Death was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, transmitted through the bites of infected fleas living on rats. It had swept across Central Asia before reaching the Crimean port of Kaffa in 1346, from where Genoese merchants carried it westward. The speed of its transmission along trade routes, the very arteries of medieval commerce, shows how interconnected the pre-modern world already was. The social consequences were as profound as the demographic ones. Survivors inherited land, demanded higher wages, questioned the church that had offered prayers and no protection. Peasant revolts erupted across Europe. Feudal obligations were renegotiated. The world that emerged from the plague was, in important ways, a different world from the one that had entered it. Chapter 56, The 100 Years' War and Joan of Arc. The 100 Years' War, which actually lasted 116 years, from 1337 to 1453, was the defining military and political conflict of late medieval Europe. England and France fought over the English king's claim to the French throne and his extensive landholdings in France. What emerged from this long, intermittent conflict was something neither side had fully intended: 2 nations, each with a distinct sense of its own identity. The war's most extraordinary episode was Joan of Arc. A teenage peasant girl from the village of Domremy in Lorraine, Joan reported visions of saints commanding her to drive the English from France and see the Dauphin crowned at Reims. In an age saturated with mysticism and prophetic expectation, she was taken seriously. In 1429, leading French forces at the Siege of Orleans, she achieved the decisive victory that turned the war's momentum. She escorted the Dauphin, Charles VII, to Reims for his coronation. Then she was captured by Burgundian allies of England, tried for heresy by a pro-English bishop, and burned at the stake in Rouen in 1431. She was 19 years old. 25 years later, a review of the trial declared her innocent. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint. Joan of Arc is the defining symbol of French national identity. She is also one of history's most striking examples of the power of conviction, of what one individual, armed only with belief, can do in a crisis moment. Chapter 57, The Fall of Constantinople. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had stood as the guardian of the Eastern Mediterranean, the continuation of the Roman Empire and the heart of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Its walls, the Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century, had never been successfully breached from the landward side. On 29 May 1453 they were. The young Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, had been preparing for this assault since he took power at 19. He built a fortress on the Bosphorus to cut off Byzantine supply lines. He commissioned enormous cannon, including the Basilica gun, designed by a Hungarian engineer named Urban, that could hurl 600-kilogram stone balls over a mile. For 55 days, these guns battered the Theodosian walls. The Byzantines, defending with roughly 7,000 men against an Ottoman army of perhaps 80,000, repaired the walls each night and fought with desperate courage. On the morning of 29 May, a small gate was left unlocked. Ottoman troops poured through. Emperor Constantine Roman XI, the last Roman emperor, died fighting in the streets. Maimed rode into the Hagia Sophia and had it declared a mosque. The Byzantine Empire, a continuous tradition stretching back to Augustus, was over. The consequences rippled outward immediately. Greek scholars fled west, carrying manuscripts that would fuel the Renaissance. The Ottoman control of the eastern trade routes to Asia became absolute, pushing European merchants to seek sea routes westward and southward. The fall of Constantinople is one of those genuinely pivotal moments, a hinge of history on which an entire era swings open and another swings shut. Chapters 58 through 61, The Renaissance and the Age of Exploration. The Renaissance, the rebirth, was the great cultural movement of 15th century Italy and eventually all of Europe. What was reborn was not precisely the ancient world, which had never truly died, but the conviction that human reason, human creativity, and human achievement were worthy of celebration in their own right, not merely as subordinate to divine glory. The intellectual engine of the Renaissance was humanism, the conviction that the study of classical Latin and Greek authors, Cicero, Virgil, Plato, Aristotle, was the highest form of education, and that the measure of excellence was not only theological virtue but human accomplishment. Florence was the epicenter, and the Medici family its great patrons. Cosimo de' Medici and his grandson Lorenzo, the Magnificent, poured their banking wealth into the support of artists and philosophers. Brunelleschi's dome for Florence Cathedral, still the largest brick dome ever built, rose through the first half of the 15th century. Gaibatti's bronze baptistry doors, which Michelangelo called the Gates of Paradise, were completed in 1452. Botticelli painted the birth of Venus and Primavera. Leonardo da Vinci filled his notebooks with designs that would not be realized for centuries. Michelangelo carved the David and painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Johannes Gutenberg's development of movable type printing around 1450 was the technological revolution that made the Renaissance and the Reformation possible. Within 50 years of the Gutenberg Bible, more books had been printed than in all the previous 1,000 years of manuscript culture. Ideas could now spread faster than any authority could suppress them. And European sailors were pushing beyond the known world. Bartholomew Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. Columbus reached the Americas in 1492. Vasco da Gama completed the first sea voyage to India in 1498. The world had suddenly become very much larger. End of Part 9.